Well, we want to just get right into the show that we have for you here today, and we want to talk more about the conditions for political prisoners in Palestine, which is an issue that we certainly feel is not being discussed enough. And we are very, very honored to be joined here for this conversation by Basil Farraj, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University, which is in Palestine. Basil, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, Rania, and good to be on the show. And thanks for all your work. I mean, it's amazing, and I hope it's changing the discourse.
Well, we hope the same, and it's really great to have you here, and I think an important topic to really be talking about at any time. But of course, you know, we've seen in the West Bank the number of people being arrested every single day. It only seems to increase significantly. So those who are being, held in prison, by the Israeli authorities, their situation, their conditions, very important to know about. And I guess I was just hoping maybe you could give us some framing on this issue. We've talked about it a little bit on the show, but how many people are being swept into this system, and what are the laws around it? I mean, give people a sense, if you can, of just sort of some of the basics on this.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. So before I answer that, perhaps it's important to note that imprisonment and carcerality, and actually the space of the prison itself, has constantly been central to the Israeli settler colonial project. This is not only attested by the sheer number of prisoners. I mean, we're talking about an estimate of 1 million who have passed through Israeli Zionist prisons since 1948. And of course, in addition to that, we are talking about a system where there's a dual legal system, and much has been written about this, right? I mean, a military court system, military orders, and a civilian law that does not only inherently discriminate between Palestinians and Israelis, but it also inherently criminalizes and racializes Palestinians as inferior, as less humane, and as inhumane as well. And I mean, we've all heard the testimonies from these settlers who describe Palestinians as human animals. Now, of course, the logic also extends to the ways in which Palestinian prisoners are treated. I mean, this is also before October 7th, before this resistance operation, where Palestinians were tortured, violated, their rights were negated. They were not able to visit their families, speak to them, communicate with them. And of course, I think this also illuminates the broader settler colonial logic under which this entity functions, where Palestinians are racialized, they're discriminated against, they're also inferior. And I think we're witnessing this in this sheer cruelty in what's happening inside the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Now, specifically to speak about prisons, it's important also to note here that before October 7th, before this resistance operation, Israel has been systematically torturing and violating prisoners' rights. I mean, this has been much written about. Torture practices that are akin to the ways in which I think many of your audience would remember photos from Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and even the US-backed dictatorships in Latin America. So there's a history to that practice. But now, since October 7th, Israel has engaged in a brutal campaign. First of all, it's a revenge campaign against what they have witnessed on October 7th, but also it's a campaign to withdraw all of Palestinian prisoners' rights that actually they were not granted simply by the Israeli prison authorities. They were rights secured through decades of struggle, through hunger strikes, through disobedience, through military court boycotts, and other forms of practices that include also writing and doing works of art and other things. Now, since October 7th, just to give the audience kind of a view of what's happening. Since October 7th until now, the Israeli, or what's referred to as the Israel Prison Service and the Israeli army, the settler colonial army, has arrested at least 2,700 Palestinians, including over 30 journalists, 85 Palestinian women. We are talking about 150 children who were arrested just in a period over a month. We are talking about also 45 university students, and in fact, actually, this number we can add to it also hundreds of Palestinians who are arrested from Jerusalem, from the 1948 areas, in addition to actually an unknown number of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip who were present in the 1948 areas before this resistance operation, and who were sent to actually military detention camps that we have described as literally akin to Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. Now, this is in addition, of course, Eugene, to an unknown number of Palestinians who are actually being arrested now in the Gaza Strip. We do not know what their condition is. We do not know what's happening to them, nor do we know if they are unfortunately alive or not. Now, if I may also, I think I should also allude to their current condition now inside prisons. So
Please.
this escalation, of course, as I have mentioned, it amounts to kind of a doubling of the numbers of prisoners since before October 7th. We're talking about a near number of 10,000 Palestinian prisoners. But inside prisons, and here I note that this is not new. But what Israel is doing is an amplification of its violent, genocidal war, not only in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and 1948 and Jerusalem, but also inside prisons. My father is a long-term political prisoner. He's been held for the past 4 years in Ofer prison. Myself and my family, as other Palestinian families of prisoners, I have not heard from him since October 7th. Now, this is not the end of the story. On October 7th, what's referred to as the Israel Prison Service, aided by the settler colonial army, invaded all of the prison wards. They confiscated all of prisoners' properties. So I'm talking about, of course, properties. I mean, very simple properties, right? Their pens, their pencils, their letters from their families, their photos, their books. My father is an avid reader. He has no books at this stage. They confiscated everything. They also cut electricity and water in the cells, which is also a mirroring of what's happening in the Gaza Strip, right? Since the beginning of the blockade, since over the past 17 years. They also engaged in a deliberate and systematic starvation campaign. I've heard testimonies, Eugene and Rania, of prisoners who tell us through their lawyers that they are not, basically they're not fed. The food comes simply for a few number of prisoners. The food is also in very bad condition as well. It's not cooked, actually. So it's a deliberate starvation campaign. The Israeli prison service also locked all prison cells. The prisoners cannot leave their wards. Some of the prisoners actually have to stay 24/7 inside their cell, with only some wards are allowed to leave a bare minimum of 15 minutes. We've heard that many of the prisoners now are facing serious medical conditions because of they're basically total isolation from the world. The Israel Prison Service as well has denied family visitations. They have cut down all communication with the prisoners. The ICRC actually, in a very show of this of how this genocidal regime works, it continues to deny the ICRC visitations to prisons, even to the ones to these concentration camps where Gazan prisoners are held, where we do not know anything about their condition. And I must point to a very important fact here, that in addition to all of this, which is basically entirely isolating prisoners from their natural environment and actually from each other, and sending some prisoners to isolation, but the Israeli settler colonial army has also embarked on a brutal campaign of violating prisoners, of torturing them inside detention cells, not only during raids, arrest raids, but also during inspections and daily raids. This has led to the death of at least, and I say at least because we do not have information, at least 5 Palestinian prisoners. The most recent prisoner was killed basically this week. And actually, Israel, this settler colonial regime, this entity, it continues to hold their bodies hostages. It holds the bodies of those prisoners who are killed alongside a number of other Palestinians. And here, if I may, this is important to note, because Israel deliberately, since 1960s, has been engaging in a deliberate policy of retaining, withholding Palestinian bodies, dead bodies, hostages. We are talking about over 252 bodies held from 1967 until 2015, and then another 154 from 2015 until now, who are held in freezers. The previous stage, so from 1967 until 2000, they are held in cemeteries of numbers, so on undisclosed military locations. No one knows where they are. They are denying their families the right to bury them. So we are talking about an entire, it's a system of carcerality that not only controls the livelihoods of Palestinians, but also the dead Palestinians. We have had at least 16 Palestinians being killed inside prisons, and the Israeli authorities deny to release their bodies to their families for a proper burial. And this is also aided, Eugene, by a Supreme Court ruling in 2019. Of course, I say a Supreme Court ruling with much doubts, because the state functions with this kind of facade of a legal system, right? A theatrical legal system. But it has been withholding the bodies because they say that we can hold these bodies as leverage when negotiations happen, when negotiations take place. And then they come and tell us about hostage taking and this kind of these terminologies. So just to kind of before I turn it back to you, to say that Israel has been engaging in this genocidal war across the Gaza Strip. We have, as you have correctly mentioned, we have, it's insane that it's ongoing for the sixth week in a row. But inside prisons, also a war is taking place. I say a war because Israel is not only, this entity is not only engaging in brutal force, but also it's deliberately killing Palestinian prisoners because they want to take revenge. Because it's also that's how this settler colonial logic functions. And I think it's important to highlight this because every day our worry and the family's worries increases because Israel, as we know, is a murderous state. It's a genocidal state, and we have been witnessing this for the past 75 years.
I mean, it's really frightening what you're describing because obviously Israeli leaders are expressing genocidal intent over and over and over again, and they are in charge of the people they want to genocide in so many different ways, whether it's this horrible onslaught in Gaza or whether it's the various zones of occupation and imprisonment across the West Bank or whether it's actually being in prisons. So I'm just curious, are there any mechanisms
blood on the transport and the prisoners' transport vehicles, which means that prisoners are being brutalized, beaten, tortured, and even killed. So legal mechanisms. I think the ICRC, and here it's important to note that Israel is not allowing. And when I say Israel, I mean the settler colonial entity, right? It's not so. This entity has been deliberately denying the ICRC. Actually, they have not just denied it; they told them straight out that you cannot visit any Palestinian prisoners unless you get our hostages out, unless you tell us how our hostages, their conditions are, and basically there are no legal mechanisms because even the lawyers themselves, according to Ad-Damir, which is a human rights organization working here, it's a Palestinian organization, they have been facing severe restrictions on lawyer visits. One of my colleagues, who was a lawyer, uh, uh, she went to visit and she was returned. They actually let her enter the after the security inspections, they let her enter to the prison wards for the prison visitation room, and then they immediately sent her back. So there had never been actually legal protections for Palestinian prisoners because we have long been saying that these conditions are akin to Abu Ghraib, they are akin to Guantanamo, and I think the world is seeing now how Israel is not only teaching the United States their brutal tactics, but actually the US is also aiding in these brutal practices. So we can understand this connection between Guantanamo and the Israeli prisons. But I think there are no illegal mechanisms, Rania, because this is a genocidal state. It has, unless the world rises up now, which I think it's taking place, nothing will change. But there might be some way for the listeners to do some action, which I think it might do some pressure, which is to write to the ICRC delegations in your countries to tell them that this is inappropriate, that you have to do your mandate. I mean, why are you present in across historic Palestine if you are not able, if they deny you your mandate, basically. They are denying you the mandate of visiting Palestinian prisoners, of allowing visitations. And I'm not speaking as a family, I'm speaking because of the history that we carry on our shoulders, which is a history of 75 years of genocide, but also a history of resistance. And I think, Rani, just a short way of answering your question is that even prisoners themselves at certain stage, they understood that there are no legal mechanisms, and they fought. They went hunger strikes, civil disobedience inside prisons. They went on, collective disobedience campaigns to force their rights. One of the prisoners died this year, Khadra Adnan, who was on hunger strike. No one moved. I remember the IRA's, 10 dead prisoners from Northern Ireland. How the world kind of moved in their direction, and there are now, resistance fighters, right? So I think one of the ways to change this is to change the discourse. Those people, Israel continuously denies the label political prisoner. They refer to them as security prisoners. They are not. These are political prisoners. There are children as well who are just caught in prison because of waving a flag or chanting. I think prisons are a reflection of what's taking place. Because honestly, what has been happening for the past 75 years is that all of us have been living in this open air prison, and all of us are potential prisoners at a certain stage in this reality.
Well, Basil Farraj, we really appreciate the opportunity to have you on to talk some about this. We're definitely going to have you back. There's a lot to dig into here, but just want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for both of you. Thank you very much.